Right. Hi, I'm Nick Binedell in the series we've been doing in 2025 called Fate, Luck and Choice. And we're going to peek our nose over the perimeter into 2026 with my good colleague, Adrian Saville. Welcome, Adrian.
Great to be with you, Nick. Different parts of the world. You're in a cold but beautiful part.
Yeah, I'm in a cold Slovenia in Eastern Europe, which is a very interesting economy and a bit of a speedboat. So I'm lecturing here and looking forward to talking with you about what lies ahead. Can we see over the hill?
Yeah, so we finished, we did our penultimate episode for 2025, Fate, Luck and Choice, trying to find an animal that characterized the year. I had a go at black rhino. You had a go at, you had a trifecta of camels, elephants, and blue bottles. That four ball brings us into this vantage point where we're now trying to figure out what 2026 looks like. What's your animal? What's the mood?
I've got two, Adrian. One is if life degenerates a bit, and because I'm in Europe, I'm pretty conscious about the European war that's underway and the dangers it presents. And of course, as we speak, there are these negotiations underway. But my animal, you can only see under a microscope. It's called a tardigrade, or otherwise known as a water bear. And it's a
Yeah,
tiny, tiny little creature, but it can survive 150 degrees centigrade.
survives nuclear winter.
It can survive a nuclear winter. It can go 30 years without sustenance, without being fed, and then it keeps living for 30 years. These little things have been known to reproduce within 2 days of getting sustenance. So it's an extraordinarily tough little creature. I hope that's not the nature of the year. But I'm going back to the camel because I think next year is going to be much like this year, although the uncertainty may settle down a bit and maybe we've reframed the world now. And as we said in our last episode, South Africa's reached a little bit of improvement, hopefully. We still have to grapple with some really fundamental problems, but I think we're ending the year on a slightly cheerier note. The global forecast is about 2.8 to 3% GDP growth next year, so that's not too bad, but of course it's very regional. I'm deeply worried about the African economies and how they're doing. I'll be keen to hear if you have anything to say about that. And I've got three country picks for next year: Poland, Saudi, and Southeast Asia. Those are my regional picks, and keen to hear what you have to say about 2026.
Yeah, first, let me put my animal right on the table up front. I'm going for the civet. And you might remember 2011, one of the strategists at HSBC labeled a cluster of countries the civets: Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, and South Africa. And I think that there's a lovely sort of resonance in that. In trying to think of the animal, I was looking for something that is agile, opportunistic, that can sort of survive challenging circumstances, and that can find its way through barriers and obstacles. And so I'm going to go for the civet, as my animal. I think that that's not necessarily what the year will do, but I think that's what businesses, politicians, regulators, executives, managers need to do in order to set themselves up to have a good 2026. 2026 is not going to give. It's likely to give, or not going to give, freely and generously. It's likely to give challenges and stress, far less volatile and disruptive than 2025, far less dramatic, because the big political episodes are now fairly distant in the rearview mirror. And so it might feel more settled in that we now are more familiar with the uncertainty. And that will equip us to be civet-like. So that's what that's my animal. And I'll actually stay with that list of countries. I think, South Africa is finding a stronger footing, so the S might belong. You've mentioned Southeast Asia. I've done a fair bit of time in Vietnam. Absolutely fascinating case. So the V certainly belongs in our civets. Well, Colombia, maybe I'd replace Colombia with Chile in the Latin American region. Better prospects, particularly helped by their rich commodity portfolio, particularly copper, and strong institutions. We can stay with Indonesia, superb Southeast Asian story. And then you mentioned right at the start, whether there was a place for Africa. Egypt has found a stronger footing in recent times. And I think we need to be careful about talking Africa as a place. We've recently contributed to RMB's Where to Invest in Africa, covering 31 countries. Egypt finds its way right at the top of the list, but we need to be very careful about talking about Africa as a place. And then Turkey, always an enigma. Never sure if it's east or west, never sure if it's fast or slow, but I'll put civets as an animal and as an acronym into 2026.
That's fantastic. So, one of the things to keep an eye on, and I really like your theme about civets, and G20 was part of this, is these smaller countries coming together, surprising Canada, Saudi I mentioned, Poland I mentioned, Indonesia. There are many medium-sized economies that, given what's happened in the USA, may form more of an alliance, may work better together, and are, like your civets, I like the analogy, are more agile. The question for me, I'd love to ask you, Adrian, is what is your thinking about tech companies? They've dominated the American stock exchange, and most stock exchanges kind of follow it in a way, are affected by it, including ours. But do you foresee a major revisiting of their value? I'm thinking of NVIDIA and so on.
Yeah. Nick, there's a couple of stories going on here. The first is just, the background of the structural drivers. I've got absolutely no doubt that these companies are central to the next decade, next generation. Other names will join this cluster, but if we talk of just the Magnificent Seven for the sake of convenience, these are central to business, industry, and in fact geopolitical arrangements over the next decade or more. We can quickly add to that,
and our personal lives and the tools that they
absolutely
are extraordinary.
Absolutely. I mean, here we are doing our last episode of Fate, Luck, and Choice, different parts of the world, with fairly reliable tech. I think where I would give particular attention in that conversation about the Magnificent Seven is look to other parts of the world, and in particular India and China. They are building remarkable businesses. Whilst the world is fascinated with the big seven, there's a lot going on in other geographies. The issue of valuation, I share. Well, you didn't express a concern. Let me volunteer my concern. Is oftentimes regularly people confuse great companies with great investments. Magnificent Seven are fantastic businesses, but they are on very stretched multiples, and so that injects a investment risk into the world of 2026. It's not just the valuations that we see going on in these businesses. It's that there is now a circular economy that they've created amongst themselves, sort of passing the parcel to each other in financial transactions, with each pass of the parcel not being a layer removed, but another layer of capital added. And I think that injects a particular risk into 2026. I'm always cynical about our ability to forecast and say, well, these companies will fall from elevated prices. Sometime through the year. They've been defying gravity for a long time. They can continue to defy, but putting money into great businesses at very rich prices is seldom a good investment.
Lovely. So let's come home and talk about Mzansi. So we've got local government elections looming. We've got this attempt at a dialogue. We've got the GNU, which has managed to keep going in spite of
Yeah,
all the challenges. And so there's some cause for some optimism. My worry about South Africa is just the longer term structural dynamics of innovation and R&D and tech absorption. I really hope that big multinationals up their presence in South Africa to give us the tools to be productive. I think our democracy system, the constitutional democracy we live under is fairly stable, but I worry about whether South Africans have really thought enough about the value of democracy. I was listening to a professor the other day in Europe saying young people in Europe love socialism because they've never really lived under it. And so it's a
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
a thing that's going on between autocratic, strong leaders in these countries you've mentioned, and then the public's grumpiness about what governments have delivered and looking for other options. That's a concern for me in South Africa and elsewhere.
Nick, if I could, just interject there, you mentioned very early on Poland, in your preamble, and I had the good fortune of attending an event at the Polish with a Polish consulate recently, and they had an economist speaking about the fortunes of the economy over the last 30, the Polish economy and society over the last 35 years. I was struck by this, that in the early 1990s, the Polish and South African economies were approximately the same size, a couple of $100 billion. And fast forward to 2025, the Polish economy is now bigger than $1 trillion, and it is continuing to sort of push forward with robust economic growth. Significantly faster than the rest of Europe, faster than its population growth. It's built global competitiveness. If there were some things that you could gather looking back, not at 2025, but over 25, 35 years, what has Poland got right that South Africa perhaps has walked past that opportunity? And what has South Africa got wrong that South Africa could stop doing?
Well, of course, I spent 10 days in Poland in 2025. And, it's remarkable because it's got deep institutions, a lot of social contract, a civil society that's pretty unified. It's quite religious. It's a strongly religious country, and of course, it recovered from a terrible Second World War, which took
Mm,
decades to do, and then suddenly it burst out into a free market world, a democratic world, and of course, it's managed to feed off the relative sluggishness of Europe, in Germany, even in Russia, but mainly in Europe. It's an extraordinary people. It's an incredible country to study. I'm in Slovenia, which, of course, as we all know, was Yugoslavia at one stage under socialist Tito. It all unraveled in the 80s. But Slovenia is also similar. It's a civet. It is a fast moving economy, very good education. And I mean, we're educators, so we should talk more about education and skills and the institutions
mm.
that create either inside your company or elsewhere. But without, in a knowledge economy, in a tech-driven society, you've got to have a strong education system that is preparing people for the future. In Slovenia, that's there for sure, and I certainly saw that in Poland. And that's why I refer so often to Southeast Asia, because education is their great, great asset. And we are definitely lagging, as I've mentioned before, on that front.
I was just going to
Yeah,
say that,
yeah,
that education sits on top of infrastructure, and that infrastructure
right.
sits on top of institutions. So you've got this fantastic stacking of the institutions that are necessary to build enabling infrastructure, and then people that are capable of driving this cocktail.
So I often talk about the four I's, with infrastructure at the bottom, then institutions, then the freedom for individuals to excel, and then the quality of ideas in a country. Is it an innovative
Brilliant.
society that's producing great artists, great literature, great scientists who are free to explore and exploit the ideas that they have? Those are the four I's I'm always looking at. They're both eyeballs and little letter I's.
And if you were to score South Africa on those four I's,
Below
where
our
would you?
potential. We're below our potential. We've got more latent potential than we've got expressed and delivered. The state is the major issue in South Africa. It's too big. I've always said we need a small and muscular state. We need a state that intervenes and makes good decisions, but we don't need a very large, bloated state, which very often we have. And, we've got to mention the C word. We've got to talk about corruption and how to bring this down in South Africa. 2025 was a terrible year for corruption. We've all seen, where we're so lucky is we've got the freedom to express our views, and the books that have been written this last year and before about the level of corruption. I was particularly haunted by the Tembisa story that Jeff Wicks uncovered over 3 years. And I hope in 2026 we're going to see an improvement in state-owned enterprises, a slightly better tempered private sector, some more interest internationally as South Africa as a reliable partner, and a sense of we can do better than we've done. Let's get on with it.
So, Nick, I was going to ask you as a final question as we close up our Fate, Luck and Choice podcast for the year. Not everyone celebrates Christmas, but if I were to give you, a box that you can tuck under a tree and open on the 25th of December with some magnificent things in it that would help South Africa go into 2026 in a far better shape, what would it be? You've answered that question in your observations there. So, perhaps it equips us here to, close up our final episode for the year, thanking people for listening in, encouraging people to subscribe. There's buttons you can click, and thank you for your engagement through the year. And we look forward to going into 2026 and sharing our thoughts, insights, evidence, experiences with you. Maybe there's a sort of a closing bad joke here, Nick, something along the lines of a civet and a camel go into a new year.
Well, I like that. And I want to thank you, Adrian, for working with me on this. And again, also everyone who's listened and watched, we've had lovely feedback. But to say, I always feel by the end of the year, I'm like a swimmer trying to get to an island and gasp, catch my breath, and then think about the year ahead and get the octopus of the daily grind off your head and look with your own eyes into what's coming and preparing yourself well for a good year. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Adrian, and good luck to everybody for a great holiday and a good beginning to next year.
Yeah, wishing you and everyone a great festive season, Nick. Thanks for joining us.